Yes, I feel
So next, to move on to Algeria. We've heard little from Algeria since January, but there have been ongoing protests there since the end of last year that call for the overthrow of President Bouteflika. What is currently happening in Algeria? And, to add on to that, how is it perhaps different or similar to what we saw unfold in Tunisia or Egypt?
Yeah. Well, Algeria is a case unto itself in many ways. I mean, one, of course, is the fact that Algeria has for a long time had a very animated civil society in which groups and individuals have been willing to go into the streets and protest for a whole slew of different causes. Some of economic origin, others of political origin, some cultural. The Berbers in the Kabylia area have long demanded, linguistic and other kinds of cultural rights, which they have gotten. So there's a history of public participation and involvement in a civil society. On the other hand, even more so than Egypt, the military has been the absolute centerpiece of the Algerian state. And the comment often made about, most states have an army. It's only in Algeria that an army has a state. That's the extent to which the army controls the state. So, and they have, unlike Egypt, because of oil and gas as a major gas exporter, they have had the resource, and they effectively control the national oil and gas company called Sonatrach. So that's their continuous source of revenue, plus the historical cohesion of the high army officer class that has been willing, one, to stage coups as they did in 1965 and 1992, two, if the challenge is sufficiently wide and threatening, they're willing to kill, as we saw in the Civil War from 1992 to about 2002, 200,000 people died in Algeria. So here it's clear that the army is willing to use force and has an incredible amount of interest that it's willing to protect and die for. And finally, it's a military that's almost impossible to penetrate in trying to understand how they think, how they work, how they make decisions. And there's a great deal of internal divisions that often lead to assassinations and settling of scores through violence. And we have many examples of that. So you have a vibrant, dynamic civil society that has a whole slew of grievances, not much different than all the other countries in the area. Then you have a state in which the military has long viewed as its own privileged source of power and patronage and perks. And we have enough experience to show when the two clash that the military is willing to use force and kill people. So that doesn't speak favorably to a kind of peaceful transformation of the kind we saw in Tunisia or the kind of in Egypt. On the other hand, back in 1988, 89, 90, 91, Algeria was the first of the Arab states to experience a genuine democratic revolution, but that it was overturned by a military coup. So it shows us that the Algerians have the capacity and even the experience that Tunisia and Egypt did not have, because they had a new constitution that was voted in 1989. They had local and regional elections in 1990, and then they had parliamentary elections in 91. So at least they had at least a year, 2 years of experience with democratic elections, which obviously Tunisia and Egypt have not had that chance yet, to demonstrate that they can do. And it involved Islamic parties, which is interesting. So does an Islamic party, how does it operate within a democratic election process? It worked fine. Anyway, it was overturned. So there, it's really quite unclear how this will turn out. What everyone agrees on, however, is there is deep discontent, deep dissatisfaction with both the way power is being maintained and the way in which social and economic opportunities are being limited, given the fact that the country produces as much oil and gas. And Bouteflika, it's interesting, he's not viewed the same way by Ali and Mubarak. He's not hated, he's not an object of scorn, because the Algerians know that the real power lies in the army. And in fact, it was the army that brought Bouteflika into power in the first place. because after they staged the coup, they were trying to identify some civilian figure who would serve as their front man. And they chose somebody who was a historic fighter during the revolution, and he was assassinated within 6 months after his taking over office. So obviously this was not a position that anybody wanted to take very quickly. And Bouteflika turned them down initially. Says, no, I'm not gonna. The guy who was assassinated was named Mohammed Boudiaf. Okay. Says, I don't want to have I don't want to happen to me what happened to Boudiaf. But finally they convinced him in 1999. But again, it was the army that brought him in. And then when he sort of consolidated his power and tried to sort of move the military somewhat away from the centers of power, they sort of lashed back at him with a vengeance. And then they sort of attacked his whole executive staff of Sonatrach. They had the head of the National Police assassinated. So they're back calling the shots. It's basically the security military, which is an intelligence service. So they see Bouteflika as a sick man, as a man who's really doesn't have the power, but who's representative of this failed state. And they would like the party, which is the FLN that he represents, to step down. They want him to step down, though they realize that the military is really the power behind the throne.
Yeah, interesting case, and shows the diversity between these cases. Obviously not portrayed in Western media too well, but that each of these cases
very much so. Very much so.
And in that sense, I'd like to move on to what you would, I'm guessing, consider a unique case in itself too, Morocco. And we've heard very little from there. I mean, we've heard a little bit about some protests, and it's the same kind of thing that we saw in Jordan earlier, in terms of, calling out against the parliament and not calling out against the monarch. Okay, so we're calling for the dissolution of parliament in Morocco, but not King Mohammed. Yeah. Okay, so I just wanted you to elaborate in the same way you did in Algeria upon developments in Morocco and perhaps similarities, differences between other cases we've seen unfold.
Well, again, I think that's the way to phrase it, the way you just did. I mean, there are clear similarities. The similarities tend to essentially be those of the grievances within civil society. Okay. And they're economic, they're social, they're political. They're fairly explicit. I mean, people have been kept down for damn too long a time. Economic opportunities have always been stifled because of corruption, crony capitalism, mismanagement, and unlike Algeria, Morocco doesn't have these kinds of resources. It's a very poor country, basically agricultural, and yet there is an enormous amount of concentration of wealth among the elite class, beginning with the monarchy. So there's a recognition among the politically conscious people of Morocco that this is a poor country in which there's incredible divisions of wealth between the rich and the poor. Segments of rural society are illiterate, don't have electricity, don't have water, inadequate housing, you name it. So those grievances are pretty much across the board. They would only vary in intensity. How the regime responds is a bit different, and the manner in which power is maintained is different than, for example, the case of Algeria. Now, the monarchy is the centerpiece of the Moroccan political system. However much it likes to call itself a parliamentary system, or however much it has a constitution, the reality is the king has the power to dissolve parliament. He has the power to suspend the constitution. He's the head of the army. In other words, within the monarchy, the throne, he has ultimate powers in the military, political, and economic fields ultimately. So as long as that remains the case, it isn't sufficient to simply rotate cabinet members or dismiss cabinet members or appoint new prime ministers, or in this case to have promised that from now on the prime minister who in the past has been selected by the king, thus as in the current case of El Al-Fassi, though he did not represent the majority party, the king chose him. So what now he says, well, there are going to be reforms. The party that gets the majority of seats, or the coalition that's formed, whatever is, if there's not a majority party, they will decide who will be the prime minister in the form of what we're familiar with, let's say, in constitutional monarchies like in England or Spain or Sweden. And I view these as more symbolic than substantive in nature. The grievances will not be taken care of in this way. The corruption will remain as it is. Power remains concentrated in the king. And also, the king himself has lost a great deal of his popularity from the time he came into power in 1999 when his father died, Hassan II. He was called, the king of the poor, and he was viewed as young and energetic and empathetic and sympathetic with his people, and da-da-da. And that lasted just a very few. Now, I think that the bloom is off the roses. People are saying, wait a second, you've got to start delivering goods. And he seems, unlike Hassan II, who was very wily and very clever and a real politician, this is a man who doesn't want to be king. This is a man who doesn't want to govern. He doesn't want to, so he's got all the power, but he doesn't really know what to do with it. And it's clear that the military here will not allow a fundamental regime change that will in any way jeopardize their position. And they are a key factor. Key factor both in maintaining the regime and the potential factor that might overthrow it, as witnessed when there was 2 assassination attempts against King Hassan back in 1971 and 72 by the military. That he was lucky to survive. Anyone that studies Morocco, when they talk about the monarchy and they talk about the parliamentary system, however flawed and impotent that it is, it's the military. What is the status of the military? What will it do? Will it come in to support the monarchy, or will it stand on the other side? So in that sense, here we have the example of Tunisia and Egypt, what the military did there. We have the example of Algeria, where it's clear what the military will do. And then we have a case in Morocco where it could go either way. It could go either way because they've demonstrated they will come in to try to assassinate the king and therefore obviously eliminate the monarchy altogether. But on the other hand, since the invasion of the Western Sahara in 1975, they have a great stake in the system. They've invested people, manpower, and many thousands of deaths, financial investment, and so on and so forth, that they're not going to allow to lose easily. So that's a wild card in the case of Morocco.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a point you brought up yesterday in your talk as well, that, perhaps these facades of, stability. I mean, when people think about Morocco from a Western perspective, we think about, in this sort of tumultuous area with all these countries maybe falling like dominoes, that Morocco is a beacon of stability. So it's, good, obviously, thank you for distilling that touch.
And there are demonstrations. I mean, there have been demonstrations for a long time. I mean, ones that have been going on for years now is what is now is an organization called the Movement of Unemployed Graduate Students. And they demonstrate in front of Parliament like every day, literally, and so on and so forth. Now they don't get violent; it doesn't get out of control. But there've been demonstrations, and there's a great deal of mobilization. So all the elements that we've seen take place elsewhere, they're there. We just don't know what's going to be that catalyst. Who's going to set themselves on fire, or what what will the army do, and so on. So one has to keep an eye on what happens.
Absolutely.